Suddenly everything made sense when I looked at the bigger picture of all those situations that triggered me. Every time someone spoke about leaving, my nerves went haywire. But why was that so? What was the reason? Well, to find out, I only had to compare my life here and my life outside the hospital. And there had to be an anomaly, some sort of distinction between inside and outside. And when I brought that to an end, only one point remained, which I was even able to give a name. Chloe. That was the time I confessed to myself that there was something inside this room I hadn't seen my entire life. And I'm not even talking about a girlfriend or something like that, although that was also part of the truth. The point is simply that I've never met a person that seemed so close to me, so close to my line of thoughts, so close to my personality. And that made her different from all the others. Slightly exaggerated, she had the tendency to combine many good traits from others I've experienced in her being. And as a consequence, some kind of deep sympathy emerged. That was the moment I realized that for the first time. And when I think about what the doctor said, then I have a clear target in front of me, and showing the time left here, especially the time with Chloe. Well, easier said than done, because I had this strange trait inside me that made it incredibly hard to approach girls. Were it a dude, no problem, but this way, it's complicated, to say the least. Maybe the origin of that was my past experiences with girls, and that I never had a more intimate relationship with one. Not a long time ago, I was still ashamed of myself, because of my exterior and interior equally. But although things have changed, and I gained a massive amount of self-confidence, I had to ask myself if it was really sufficient for getting closer to Chloe. I mean, at least I know her name, which is a small beginning. So with that conclusion in mind, I could elaborate the question which was most important to me. Is she more than I think she is? But to find that out, I had to deepen the topics between us, and exactly this was the problem. I mean, I could speak about general matters, like sports or crowd interests, even with girls. After all, I'm not some kind of sociopath. But the deeper, more personal levels of communication seemed quite far away, even with Chloe. Further, I just didn't want to make a mistake I would regret later on. For example, by wanting too much, because then it seemed like I, as a dude, were only after one thing. And that's neither what I want, nor what she deserves. But that entire mental roller coaster doesn't lead anywhere. If I were the doctor, I'd say that before you can reach a place you desire to be, you have to go there, by walking, by driving, by flying, by climbing. But the core stays the same. Beginning with the first step is imperative. When I finished that sophisticated thought, I had to chuckle silently. I really could be a concurrence for the doctor. Of course, my laughter hiccup sound was audible, so she approached while I was laughing. I was better off not telling her the entire thought, so I rang for words and found an emergency answer. Your parents, our parents, are quite good together, aren't they? To be honest, I've never seen them so happy before. Only a few times, but that's not worth mentioning, she answered. But why? They're super likable, as far as I've experienced them. It is not my business, so... No, Aaron, it's fine. She looked me in the eyes and grinned coyly. Look, sometimes you just experience something that weighs you down slightly. And sometimes it's something that smacks you to the ground, so that you have to remember who and where you are, and that you better stand up to move on. As she finished that epoch response, I remained silent, not really knowing what I had to expect. According to my interpretation, her parents had experienced something like a Jeremiad of some sort. But bad news can be ambivalent and therefore refer to any area. So does she have a sister to whom something happened, or another family member that experienced an accident? Whatever it may be, so much I'd like to help. It's just not my business. and because of that, I couldn't reach further, even though I wanted to. I desired to know more about her family, and first and foremost, more about the reason for her being here. But all topics were too personal in my opinion, so I flinched, and as a result, a little silence emerged. A little silence in the sense of a couple of minutes, for she quickly found a new area to talk about. "Aaron?" she asked me. "Your parents said something about your school situation. What's it like to be in school?" At first, I frowned a bit as she formulated her question, because it was another strange one. The way it was constructed told me that school was something unusual for her. But that's just impossible. How can you escape the duty to visit school? However, not paying further attention to the space behind the scenes or the reason behind questions, I mused a little bit about the probable answer. I really had to think about how it feels when you have to go to school every morning. The last time I went to school was 1 week ago, and I'm a person that gets used to new situations quite quickly. Anyways, after a couple of seconds, I created a collage with some of the most remarkable moments of my school time so far. I started with the incident back in 10th grade when, well, let's say the sleep rhythm of a classmate was severely influenced by the subway. As I brought up this riddle, I had to smile. It was just so absurd. At the end of grade 10, we made an excursion to Berlin. And in the youth hostel we lived in, we had to share the rooms in groups of 4. So I had 3 roommates, and one of them, well, decided to take a nap inside the subway wagon without us noticing it. The bad thing was that we only became aware of this abstinence hours later. To be exact, for this day we planned on visiting the Cathedral of Berlin, but prior to that, we also had other locations to visit. It was the cathedral when a teacher noticed something was missing. Or better, someone. Since we didn't know when he left us and why, our teacher suggested to wait and see. At least until tomorrow. Because then it was time to feel concerned about the loss of the student. So we continued our sightseeing tour as if nothing happened. Later on, when we made ourselves comfortable in the common room of the hostel to watch the football game Germany against Brazil, he suddenly walked right through the door and stared at us. When we gazed at him, someone yelled, "The lost sheep returned," while the missing student explained himself to the teacher. But our high-quality ears picked that up easily, and as a consequence, everyone started to burst into laughter. Turns out, he fell asleep inside the subway, and when he woke up, he found himself at the end of the route, somewhere inside the city. Since he was my roommate, I was at the source of information regarding this incident. But after a couple of days, in which he had to endure a little bit of gossip, everything normalized again. A second experience was when a student, it was in 11th grade or so, had a crush on our physics teacher. It went so far that the teacher pleaded the director to transfer the student to another class. Whenever our physics lesson started, we expected this very student to enter. Since he was one of the tardiest ones, the whole class oftentimes was already assembled. When he came in, he usually said something like, "Hey darling," and further, he had no intentions at all to sit on his chair so that the lesson could start. No. Instead, he remained at the teacher's desk and demanded reactions from her. She tried to control herself, but between embarrassment and annoyance, she lost it one day. Not directly in front of us, but rather behind the scenes when the student was relocated into another class. Everyone asked the questions why, but deep down everyone knew what had happened. So except for those little stories, I can give you the status quo for now. I made the transition after I had a sip of water. She only remained silent, which I took as a confirmation, so I gave her some information about my current state at school. I'm now in grade 13, and soon I have to pass the pre-abitur exams, which are quite similar to the actual main exams next year January. They only differ from the amount you have to prepare. While the pre-Abbey exams are only about the 13th year, the main Abitur is about the whole high school section, year 11 to 13. So the first thing I will have to do when I'm able to leave is catching up with all the materials, because I'm not far away from the first exam. What is your first exam about? She wondered. My first will be English, the second one biology, and the third one computer science. Basically the subjects I could choose at the beginning of year 11. Computer science? She frowned. Don't worry, that is only because I have only enlisted myself because a good friend of mine attended the subject. Well, now I know better, but you best learn through mistakes, right? Ignoring her urge to not talk about her matters, I unfortunately returned the question what her school situation was. When I noticed that it was a mistake, it was already too late. She stuttered and spoke that she had a couple of interesting experiences, but none of them were worth mentioning. I couldn't help it but ask further. I somehow lost it. Not due to anger, but confusion. Those excuses not to talk about herself made me dizzy. When she didn't want to talk about herself, she could have clarified that, but why did she use those ambivalent opaque responses? So out of an impulse, I changed my mood and asked with a serious tone, Chloe? I waited for eye contact before I continued. Is everything okay with you? I mean, when you don't want to talk about it, it's fine for me. But to be honest, I would like to know a little bit more about you. Look, in 99% of the people I had to deal with outside, I recognize similar patterns, templates, and so on. But you are different, somehow special, and